The Haunting of Blackwood Manor. When I first arrived at Blackwood Manor, the sky was a tapestry of storm clouds, and the wind howled like a mournful ghost. I was to be the new governess for two children, Clara and Thomas, whose parents had perished under mysterious circumstances. The mansion, isolated and brooding, seemed to whisper secrets through its creaking walls. Mrs. Whitlock, the housekeeper, greeted me with a stern expression. "Mind the children, Miss Harper. They can be peculiar." Peculiar was an understatement. Clara, the elder at 12, had a gaze that seemed to pierce through my soul. Thomas, a fragile boy of 8, rarely spoke, his eyes always darting to the shadows. The first night I was awoken by a chilling wail. I rushed to the children's room, only to find Clara standing by the window, staring into the darkness. "Clara, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She's coming," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Miss Eliza is coming." I shivered. Miss Eliza was the previous governess who had met a tragic end. Rumor had it she had fallen in love with Mr. Blackwood, only to be spurned and driven to madness. She had drowned herself in the estate's lake, and her spirit was said to haunt the manor. The next day, I questioned Mrs. Whitlock about Miss Eliza. The housekeeper's face turned ashen. Miss Eliza was a troubled soul. Best not to speak of her. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to explore the mansion. In the attic, I found a dusty trunk filled with Miss Eliza's belongings. Among them was a diary. As I read, a tale of love, betrayal, and despair unfolded. Miss Eliza had indeed fallen for Mr. Blackwood, but he had been a cruel man, toying with her affections. Her final entries were filled with anguish and a vow of vengeance. That night the temperature plummeted, and an eerie mist filled the halls. I heard whispers, soft and sorrowful, echoing through the mansion. Following the sound, I found myself at the lake. The water was eerily still, reflecting the pale moonlight. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist. It was Miss Eliza, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Help me," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Terrified, I fled back to the manor. Clara and Thomas were waiting for me, their faces pale. "You saw her, didn't you?" Clara asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "She wants us to find her locket," Thomas said, his voice barely audible. "It's the key to setting her free." The children led me to a hidden passage behind the library. We descended into the darkness, the air thick with the scent of decay. At the end of the passage, we found a small, dusty room. In the center was a chest. Inside, wrapped in a tattered cloth, was a silver locket. As I held the locket, a cold hand grasped my shoulder. I turned to see Miss Eliza, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Release me," she whispered. With trembling hands, I opened the locket. Inside was a lock of hair and a small, faded photograph of Mr. Blackwood. A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, and Miss Eliza's spirit began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. "I can finally rest." The mist lifted, and the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued Blackwood Manor dissipated. The children, once haunted by the past, began to smile again. As I prepared to leave Blackwood Manor, Mrs. Whitlock approached me. "You have done a great service, Miss Harper. The children are free, and so is Miss Eliza." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace. The haunting was over, but the memory of Miss Eliza's tragic tale would linger in the shadows of Blackwood Manor forever.